Hi, my name is Callie Nutter. Today I want to tell you all about how smoking cannabis, both short-term and long-term, contributes to memory decline. So first off, I want to talk about what cannabis is, which is also known as marijuana and weed. Cannabis is a flowering plant that contains many compounds, including THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient that makes people feel high. The cannabis leaves are first dried out before it can be smoked or consumed. There are multiple different ways to consume it, including smoking it, adding food to it and eating it, or vaporizing it, etc. Acute marijuana smoking can disrupt working memory and episodic memory functions that are known to rely on these regions. Working memory is a cognitive system that holds information temporarily, while episodic memory is long-term memory that involves the conscious recollection of previous experiences, like a childhood birthday party. Marijuana use has shown to disrupt both sustained and transient attention processes, resulting in impaired memory task performance. It disrupts neural mechanisms underlying memory. Sustained attention is when attention is voluntarily focused on a single location or task. Transient attention is when attention is involuntarily captured by a sudden stimulus in a new location. Long-term cannabis use impairs memory, particularly verbal and working memory. Heavy smokers who smoked on average 94 joints per week that were abstinent for 28 days showed persistent impairments in a range of memory functions. Verbal memory is the memory of words, sentences, and language. Working memory is a cognitive system that has limited capacity and holds information temporarily. Heavy use of street cannabis, specifically low cannabidiol strains, increases cognitive harms to cannabis users, like a higher risk of memory impairment. Street cannabis is also more likely to be sold in higher doses, making it stronger, and it is often laced with harder drugs such as fentanyl, making it even more dangerous. Cannabis has historically been considered as a relatively harmless drug. However, as more young people start to use cannabis at an earlier age, they are likely to be more vulnerable to its impairing effects. Smoking cannabis while the brain is still developing makes it much more likely to permanently harm someone's long-term memory and cognitive functioning abilities. The effects of cannabis use on memory are dependent on multiple factors, including how strong of a dose it is, especially cannabis sold on the streets, as increasingly potent forms of cannabis are available on the street every day. It is also dependent on the duration and frequency of previous cannabis use. Both occasional and regular users show memory impairments after both high doses and low doses. Increasing the dose of cannabis is associated with a linear decrease in performance in short-term memory tasks. Long-term cannabis use has shown to impair memory in many individuals, especially those who have smoked it consistently over multiple years. Some people may recover from their memory impairments after a period of abstinence that is at least a month or longer. The reason why specifically low cannabidiol strains increase the cognitive harms to its users is because there are two main constituents of cannabis, cannabidiol, which is CBD, and THC. THC is what primarily reduces the effectiveness of the CB1 receptor, attenuating the memory-impairing effects of THC. Cannabis that is lower in CBD and higher in THC imposes more cognitive harms on the user. A recent study suggested that memory deficits did not recover completely even after 1 year after an individual stopped smoking cannabis completely, and those who started using it regularly before the age of 18 years, indicating that the age of onset and frequency of cannabis use may be important factors that need to be considered. Long-term and early onset cannabis use appear to cause greater morphological and functional alterations in the still developing brain rather than in the mature human. So, the earlier an individual starts smoking weed, the more likely they are to experience long-term impairments on their memory. There is a much higher risk of memory impairment associated with smoking low cannabidiol strains of cannabis, like skunk, and it should be encouraged to use strains containing higher levels of cannabidiol or CBD. Skunk refers to any strand of cannabis with an extremely high level of THC. In a study done by Celia Morgan, participants who smoked cannabis low in cannabidiol, CBD, showed more noticeable memory impairment, while participants smoking cannabis high in cannabidiol showed little to no memory impairment. These are images collected over time by Dr. Stacy Gruber of Harvard Medical School from a study of medical cannabis patients completing a task. This study followed middle-aged participants before they started using cannabis for medical purposes and for 1 year after initiating use. Participants generally chose products with higher levels of CBD and lower levels of THC. Therefore, there was not any significant impact on their memory. Frequent long-term cannabis use, especially when an individual starts in their teen years, affects the aging process. They also reported more social problems such as loneliness, lower life satisfaction, and less social support. Smoking cannabis frequently, especially with a lot of THC, was linked to lower educational attainment, occupational status, and income. For example, students who are using cannabis regularly may have trouble focusing and feeling motivated during school. In a study by Aaron Elon, he found that marijuana was associated with an increased tendency to incorrectly identify distractor words as having been previously studied. Cannabis can almost immediately worsen someone's working memory, especially their short-term memory. Overall, this research proposes that the effects on both short-term and long-term memory that cannabis has is dependent on multiple factors, such as the age that someone started smoking, how often someone smokes, how much CBD is in the cannabis strand, and how much THC is in the strand. The earlier that an individual starts smoking, especially if it was before their brain was fully developed, the more likely they are to have permanent memory impairments. Strains that are higher in CBD are not associated with significant memory impairment, while strands high in THC are associated with significant memory impairment.